Well, welcome, Mwesigye, welcome, Joy. Thank you so much for joining this discussion on the US government's decision that's impacting the lives of so many of the most marginalized people around the world today. Donald Trump's executive decision to close the US government's aid agency is causing absolute chaos. It removes 40% of all aid being delivered in the world. And that aid is being delivered to some of those vulnerable people. And the US government's donations per year add up to 40 billion US dollars. That's all coming out of the system. And I'm pleased to be here with you both, as all we can collaborators, to really discuss the impact of this decision on real lives in Uganda. So thank you, Mwesigye. Thank you, Joy, for joining from Uganda.
Thank you for having us.
Firstly, maybe to you, Mwesigye, how has this decision affected all we can priority countries in sub-Saharan Africa?
Thank you, David. Just to mention, OECAN countries in sub-Saharan Africa are 6: Liberia, Zimbabwe, Uganda, Ethiopia, and Malawi, and Sierra Leone, sorry. For most of these countries, I think USAID has been really looking at key aspects of life, that is health, education, and democracy, because that's a big thing in Africa, and most of the aid has been going there. And of course, this has been badly affected. For a country like Liberia, actually, I think it's 40% of all development aid has been coming from USAID. So that's a big cut. I also know that Ethiopia, with the challenge of refugees and internally displaced people, a lot of support has been going into humanitarian assistance. And I think maybe 2023, I think it was about 1.8 billion, going towards that. And that's, going to be challenged now. There'll be a big problem in that sense. I think also 40% development support for health systems in Ethiopia has been from the USAID budget. So that is a big cut. Yeah. So people's lives are going to be really affected. Even education, refugee support, and all that will be affected. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you, Mr. So in real terms, it means boys and girls don't get to school. They don't get education.
Yeah.
It means women in labor are not getting the care and support that they need within health posts and hospitals. It's real lives being affected in very real ways.
Very real. Yeah.
And perhaps just specifically on Uganda, how are you seeing the impact of the withdrawal of this support to Uganda?
Yeah, continuing the conversation about Uganda and the health issue. Actually, I think USAID has been giving almost 100% of towards a program called PEPFAR, the Presidential Initiative working on HIV and AIDS. And that, of course, was providing antiretrovirals for about 1.2 million Ugandans living with HIV. So those are going to be badly affected. There was actually almost an alarm, people being told, try and run as fast as you can to the next health unit to be able to get your dose for a few months to go, but that is also going to run out. So it was actually the biggest, and not only just HIV, but also malaria, maternal health. I think about 471 million US dollars was going into that. So that is a big challenge. Many health centers, both government and non-government had projects that were being funded by the USAID. So like you said, maternal health is one of the things it was investing in. And that's going to be a big challenge. You're not sure how those places are going to be run. It's been also contributing to domestic revenue mobilization, trying to support government. So it's not only, the communities and people out there, but also government has been getting aid, and that's going to be affected because, Uganda has a lot of refugees. So it's been helping, towards, humanitarian assistance. About $182 million was put in 2024. And so we don't know how that is going to be managed. That is refugee education, refugee, all those people. So that's a big one. And when you come to the civil society, I think that I'll talk on behalf of the Uganda NGO Forum. I was able to speak to the director, and he says that 43% of their budget was actually coming from USAID, and NGO Forum was, able to sub-grant other organizations like Fabio. Joy will talk about that. So for them, they've had to already cut staff. And of course, when you cut staff, it's a multifaceted effect, because that's their families, that's their education, that's their mental health. Yeah, so there are big things. Yeah, it's really a big impact on the country in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very, very hard and a huge disruption for countries that are so dependent on overseas assistance and aid in this form. And as you said, maybe coming to you, Joy, as you lead Fabio in Uganda, a local organization, how do you see this decision affecting the work that you do with communities?
Thank you so much, David, for the opportunity to have a conversation around this whole issue that is happening. As an organization that is working at the grassroots, first of all, this decision was abrupt. It did not give us time to prepare. So the abruptness alone is an inconvenience. I'll share an experience that it occurred at a time when we had organized 36 communities who were supposed to engage this month. That implies that we had already reached out the different service providers, the different key players to participate. Now, out of the blue, a decision is made and it alters all that. First of all, it is very difficult to convince communities that, out of the blue, we cancel these meetings. It disturbs mentally. I mean, when it came to me as a team leader at that point, I was like, wow, where is that from? Why start calling communities that we are not having these meetings? Or what is really happening? So significantly, it affected on the work in our communities. But the other aspect for me, for example, this whole decision, these conversations on the funding that we get from USAID through our partner NGO Forum, they are platforms where the local person airs out their pain. Fabio as an institution is well known for using a bicycle to bring social transformation, bicycle to school, bicycle to the health center, bicycle to the market, among others. Now, a bicycle to school cannot address the question of not having quality education in the schools. A bicycle to the health center or a bicycle ambulance cannot address the question of not having drugs in the health center. So this whole funding is linking the voices that during this period there is a crisis, there are no drugs in the health center. Who is helping us get drugs? It is these platforms where people are getting the opportunity to hear from their leaders, to say, look, this is the challenge we are experiencing amidst Fabio giving us bicycles. So the whole decision literally implies that communities no longer have a platform where they can dialogue with their leaders, where they can freely, share their pain, their, challenges for them to be addressed. And like the context is, apparently it is now creating a platform for the leaders to come and listen to the people, not the leaders to look for their people. So there is apparently that gap that is missing. We don't know where this will end, but literally it is affecting all that. So it implies that if there are no drugs in the health centers, it means people will have to lose their lives. It means what is at stake. because of this whole decision. So that is where it puts us as an NGO, and that is the extent to which it is affecting our local communities.
Joy, thank you so much for your response. Thank you for being so open about the very real challenges communities and people are facing because of this decision that's been made. I was struck by the fact also that you talked about your relationship with communities and how that can be damaged by a decision made so abruptly. And I was thinking about how important that trust is that we all have between each other, but particularly the relationships that allow for locally led development to take place. And we really hope that you can keep that trust with communities that you're working with. I had a follow-on question for you. In given this situation and the challenge that exists, how do you think it may change how local organizations are perceived?
I think it puts local organizations in a place where they start feeling like they are more of implementers of donor ideologies. Because if a local organization was a key player, this decision would not have been drastic. There would have been consultations. We believe that if it is a partnership that is, that communication, this is happening, so that everyone gives an input and they get to understand, as opposed to just making a drastic decision where everyone is affected, where everyone is left in that space of wondering, suspense. You're like, how could this have happened? How do we go about it? So I think it puts local organizations in that space, wondering, are we really important? Is there a partnership between us and international organizations? Is there really a partnership? Or it is we are literally just implementing ideas that they feel should be implemented, and that's it.
Yeah, thank you, Joy. And Mwesigye, maybe following up on that, this is a disruption, as we can clearly see, and I'm wondering in what ways this situation could emphasize the need for sort of empowered local communities to lead their own development.
Thank you, David. And it picks on from what Joy was saying. But just to go back a bit, I had a conversation with the NGO Forum director, like I said earlier. And he actually, when I asked him, I said, what would be best, what would happen? And he said, maybe one of the things that would be helpful would be for the current donors to maybe allow the organizations to repurpose the funding that they have so that it can go to core costs, and institutional funding, because then if that is covered, then people are able to think strategically. He actually mentioned that if something happened, because it happened so suddenly, people are now in survival mode. They need to see how to survive. So strategic thinking and all that will go through the window. So that comes back to the whole idea of decolonization of aid and the localization, the conversation we've been having. Because if an organization is able to determine, what it wants to do and have its priorities and be able to be confident about itself, I think that goes a long way in supporting it to grow and to develop communities. What has been happening is that the way aid is characterized now, just like Joy said, you're almost like a conduit of, what partners want. So there's a lot of project-based funding. So a project starts, all resources are put in there, and then when it ends, they're all drawn out. So the organization doesn't even have time to grow itself, to be able to, to just be grounded where it is, because it is being a conduit. So if one was able to look again and say, how do we change aid so that people can actually be I would call it indigenous, but grow and be able to know that they can be able to fulfill their mission on their own without depending on another funder, then that would take development a long way. So when you think about aid the way it is now, I think organizations are really, really limited. So if decolonization happens, both at the mindsets and even as we work together, I think organizations can be able to take development in their own hands. So this would mean then that if core costs are paid for, if you build the institution rather than fulfill project goals, then the institution will be bold enough to be able to work and do what it needs to do. So I think that that's really, really key. Actually, the NGO Forum conversation, the conversation I had with the NGO Forum director was that the way things are now, organizations are so dependent, the way it's all defined. They're so dependent, and so they're almost helpless at the moment. So he was saying that if there was a way that aid can be restructured, that would really, really help. He actually said that some might actually see this as a blessing in disguise. He was saying that they may see it as a blessing in disguise, that maybe organizations need to begin to look again at aid because now so much has been cut off and people are almost struggling. They are struggling. So, but then he said, but it doesn't have to happen so fast, and almost like they just pull the carpet from under your feet. So, yeah, so having the conversation for these things to happen is something that is really, really critical and vital.
Yeah, thank you, Mwesigye. And one thing that struck me as you talked there was this bit about organisations just trying to survive, and we don't want that to be the case. We want local organisations like Fabio to thrive and continue to thrive. And I wondered, Joy, if you could say a little bit about sort of how all we can support is needed at this time, so that you don't just survive, but you actually thrive.
Wow. Actually, at the moment, I should say, all we can support is needed more than ever. One in about, if I categorize it, maybe in two categories. One, considering the fact that the organization had prepared at the end of the year how the year would move. They had, had planned an operational plan, looking at the different sources, looking at the different budget lines, and then out of the blue, that changes. At this moment, Fabio needs all we can in terms of one coming in to help it thrive through this whole situation, maneuver through this. But also in terms of what if this happens again? Will all we can be in position still to come and, because it will look like it's an emergency. We are now, the kind of help that would come in would be more of an emergency to Fabio. But what if this continues to happen? It implies that all we can needs to support its partners or Fabio in terms of growing it sustainably, to outgrow these kind of alterations that can come in any other day, because we do not have control over them. And the only way we can have control over such situations is for us to have maybe a social enterprise that is running, that we are sure the organization can get at least 50% of costs that run the institution. Today, if this happened and Fabio is able to cover 50% of its costs, this would not really be a heavy, heavy burden. But here comes a situation or an emergency where the organization is completely, in a state of quagmire. Yeah, like saying, how do we get out of here? How do we run throughout the year? How do we now adjust to ensure that we are able to continue operating amidst what is happening? So our call is to be supported, of course, through this current crisis in terms of repurposing the budget, if that is the word, repurposing the existing all we can budget so that it can help us, cover some of the core costs and enable us go through this crisis, but also now focusing on how best can we have a social enterprise that can sustain the institution beyond this funding. Also, I think we should be able to pick some learnings from such situations that anything can happen. Maybe this happened with USID, but it is possible that tomorrow, God forbid, tomorrow a partner can say, I have been giving all we can this kind of money, but I am not giving anymore. So what happens to the all we can partners in that situation? So for me, it is an alarm, it is a wake up call for us. It is telling us, wake up, wake up all we can partners and start to, double the efforts of sustainability. For me, this is a kind of help what need.
Joy, thank you so much for that and that call out for the need for sustainability, the challenge of so much volatility in the long-term work that you do with communities and all we can partners do with communities. It's clear for me that this decision impacts millions of people around the world. It's clear that now more than ever, local organizations like Fabio need our solidarity. Thank you for this conversation today. Thank you for all the amazing work you do. And thank you for being our friends.